Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. It's your boy D Black, coming back at you with another Raw review. Okay, Raw tonight. It was pretty good. It was pretty decent. Well, I'm not gonna say pretty good. It started off good, you know, but some of the matches were took away from how it started and how it ended. And we're gonna go with it, you know, as a start till it ends. But anyway, here we go. All right, we got Seth Rollins. He's coming out. You know, he's talking about how he's the one who started the vision and he's going to be the one to kill the vision. Then he says, that he doesn't care if he's, on the shelf like Braun Breaker or Bronson Reed, and, and that he has, two little peons and everything with lads of Austin Theory and Logan Paul. So he's obviously talking about Paul Heyman. And if anyone stands, with Paul Heyman, then they consider themselves, as marked for death. Oh, so he had, and then he would start saying that, he had the satisfaction by hitting Paul Heyman, with the steel chair. And then, it was very satisfying, when he stomped Paul Heyman's head, into the mat, and then the crowd starts booing all of a sudden. And as they're booing, then out comes Paul Heyman and Seth Rollins, saying to Paul Heyman, and he's thanking him, you know, um, saying that, he's, smart for telling Heyman, you know, that, he made a mistake. So he, was telling Heyman that he let Heyman into a circle, and that was the biggest mistake of his life by letting, Paul Heyman, be involved in him and, the things that he was doing and stuff, and that he's going to make Paul Heyman pay, for every day until he has Paul Heyman out of the wrestling business. He said that he's going to get rid of Paul Heyman, like a bad cancer, you know. And then Paul Heyman, goes on to say, that he wasn't, coming out here, you know, to do anything or say anything, but he said that he wouldn't miss what's going to happen, for anything in the world, you know. And so you're trying to figure out what is he talking about. And then Paul Heyman, says that, tells Seth Rollins that, he effed with him and now he's, um, gonna F with him, and then that he's, F with him back because everyone that knows that if you break the rules and stuff, you get FAFO. Then he repeats himself and says FAFO, and then Paul Heyman says it again, FA, but then he says FAF5, and then out comes Brock Lesnar and stuff, and Brock Lesnar comes out, and he destroys all. He destroys all of the black hoodie guys. I think he might have hurt a couple of them too, because the way he was tossing and throwing them and clotheslining them and everything, it was crazy and stuff, So, and then all of a sudden, after everybody's gone, you got Brock Lesnar and Seth Rollins standing in the ring, looking at each other, and then OBA FEMI's music starts. And I said this before, when OBA, eliminated Brock Lesnar at the Royal Rumble, that they were going to meet and they were going to be in the ring together. And after what happened tonight, because when Oba got to that ring, he looked Brock Lesnar in the face, and Brock Lesnar looked at him in the face. They got close, and then Oba just picked Brock Lesnar up like nothing, put him on his top shoulder, and fall from grace goes Brock Lesnar. Never seen that happen to Brock Lesnar before, ever since I've been seeing him and stuff. So that's going to be a good match, with them two going at each other. That's going to be great. I can't wait to see that one. So they got a match that I'm actually willing to see. Then we get El Grande Americano, the Ludwig Kaiser version, and then we got the original El Grande Americano, the Chad Gable version and stuff. So the match was, how it was. It was crazy and stuff. It wasn't really anything exciting or nothing really happened in the match and stuff like that. They just had a match. And Bravo and Rio, try to interfere. And I guess Bravo got into the ring, slipped something into Ludwig Kaiser, the El Grande Americano, face mask, and then Chad Gable, the original El Grande Americano, climbs on the top rope, hits Ludwig Kaiser El Grande in the head and knocks um, Chad Gable out, and the Ludwig Kaiser El Grande Americano wins the match and stuff. And then we got the backstage, with the OTC Roman Reigns, and the Usos, and he's telling them, that they did the right thing about as far as, CM Punk talking about, his family and stuff like that, and then he put it out there to the rest of the bloodline that, hey, on any day, before, any day after, WrestleMania, they can do anything they want to do with CM Punk and stuff. But he said during, WrestleMania that he wanted to take care of CM Punk, himself. So we're going to see what happens with that. And then we got Liv Morgan talking to the Judgment Day, saying that, it was her plan, to get rid of Finn Balor because Finn Balor, wasn't that guy anymore. He wasn't a leader and he was slacking and stuff like that. And he wasn't there. He wasn't being a part of the team. And she was saying that, they're a family and they stick together and stuff, so that they had to get rid of him and stuff like that because he was soft. And so she said that their main thing was, trying to get, titles into the organization and stuff. So I guess, that's the plan, as far as they're concerned, and we know Roxanne, she got hurt a couple of months ago. So we haven't seen her. I don't really know what her injury is, but she did get hurt in one of the matches that she had as far as one of the tag team matches that I think they had and stuff, against Lash and Nia and stuff. But I'm looking for Finn Balor to come back, as the Demon. Hopefully he does because that was a true Finn Balor when he came out as the Demon. So we'll see. I know Dom is going to get it, and I know JD McDonough is going to get it. So I think Finn probably is going to end up dismantling, the Judgment Day unless they try to find some other people that are going to be a part of it, to stop him. And then we get another backstage segment with, the OTC and the Usos and stuff, talking about, the Usos telling them everything that, CM Punk said about, Roman Reigns and stuff. And then we get the match with Bayley and AJ Lee. This match, I mean, it was okay. I mean, AJ Lee, to me, doesn't realize really, she's just an unbelievable champion and stuff. I mean, she doesn't look champion material. I mean, they could have put this belt on anybody or just let Becky just stay the champion and stuff. But anyway, the match went on. AJ got Bayley into the Black Widow, and Bayley taps out to the Black Widow. AJ Lee, she wins the match. And then all of a sudden, Becky Lynch comes out and she attacks AJ Lee and she beats the living tar out of AJ Lee. So we already know this is either going to be a match for next week or this is going to be one of the matches made for WrestleMania. We have to wait and see how that works out and how that happens. Then we get JD McDonough talking to Adam Pearce. He's asking Adam Pearce why, he did what he did as far as Dom is concerned, as far as, getting or taking his belt away from him and stuff, and stuff. And then we get this little promo as far as, Randy Orton and turning heel on Cody Rhodes and what he did to Cody Rhodes and stuff. I mean, that was kind of crazy how he handled and did Cody and stuff. I mean, he tore Cody's butt up. I guess when Cody said that he loved Randy Orton, I guess all those voices in Randy's head just started going crazy, and they started malfunctioning, and they just went off on Cody because he left Cody bloody, 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 and stuff, which was good because it made me like, oh my, I can't wait to see how this match goes. But you know how they open up stuff and everything and make everything look so good, but then when they have the match is so boring. So I'm hopefully we don't get that, and I'm hoping that when they do have the match, that Randy Orton does get number 15 and stuff. But anyway, then we had the match with Penta and Dragon Lee. You know, the match was okay. It wasn't all that great. I mean, it was good for the luchadors and stuff like that. I thought it was going to be a little bit more, you know, with some twists and turns and stuff in it. But for the most part, it was okay. I mean, they both fly, so they did do their flying and everything like that. You know, it was cool to see Dragon Lee try to bring back the memory of AJ Styles when he tried to do a Styles clash, you know, on Penta, and then Penta kicks out of that, you know, and then Penta ends up hitting Dragon Lee with the Mexican driver and winning the match and retaining, you know, the IC title and stuff. You know, and then we get the backstage thing with Austin Theory, Logan Paul, Paul Heyman, and everything, you know, and then Seth Rollins, I'm not Seth Rollins, but Logan Paul and Austin Theory is saying that, you know, that they're going to get Seth Rollins, that, you know, they're going to, you know, Seth Rollins is dead. And then Paul Heyman is basically telling them no, you know, that Seth Rollins is playing, you know, head games, you know, with them. And, um, and then he's saying, yeah, he got hit with a chair and he did get stomped. You know, he got his head stomped into the mat. You know, then he goes on to say that, you know, he's a 60-year-old man and there was no repercussions, you know, that there was no formal charges, no suspension, nothing happened to Seth Rollins when Seth Rollins did everything, you know, that he did to him and stuff, you know. I mean, that's true, but then, you know, that is Paul Heyman, because Paul Heyman sometimes he brought a lot of that on himself, especially the way that, you know, Bronson Reed and Braun Breaker took Seth Rollins out and stuff, and it took him out so bad that, you know, I mean, I think he hurt his shoulder, you know, in the match, you know, prior to and everything, so they had to do something to take him out to make it look the way that it did and stuff. So now Seth is back, you know, on a revenge thing, you know, and then Paul Heyman goes on to tell, you know, Logan Paul and Austin Theory that, you know, they lost their leverage, they need leverage back. In order to get leverage back, they have to get titles. And he said that, you know, he wants their mind to be put on to take the titles from, you know, Jimmy and Jay, the Usos and stuff, you know. And he said once they get those tag titles, then he can orchestrate how they start to become single champions, you know, and to get their power back and stuff like that. And then Austin Theory goes says something, and he walks off. And then Paul Heyman said, that's my vision." And then Logan Paul is sitting there saying to him that if he wants, you know, that's what Paul Heyman wants them to do, is to get the tag team titles, then he was going to do anything and everything in his powers to make that, you know, to make that happen and stuff. So we'll see. We'll see how that's going to work out for them, because they've been going at it with the same people, same tag team for so long. But anyway, you get the match with Maxine Dupree and Nattie, you know, and the reason now I know Nattie is mad at Maxine is because of the fact that Maxine, when she won the IC title, you know, Natalie's saying that she did not come back, you know, to the Heart Dungeon, you know, Stu's dungeon to train anymore. She was, you know, she just left. She got the title, so she figured that she was being used and stuff. And this is why her and Maxine are where they're at and stuff, because she never went back to the dungeon, you know, to finish training after she won, you know, the IC title. So Nattie now, not Natalia anymore, is going after Maxine Dupree, but it's for no title because Maxine Dupree don't have any titles anymore. So why is Nattie trying to go after AJ Lee or anybody that will probably soon have the women's IC title. So it's all messed up in the women's division as far as that is concerned, the IC title. Hopefully they get it together and we have a good match plan for WrestleMania for that title and stuff. And then we get the segment where um, Cole is supposed to, ask Randy Orton some questions, and then Randy Orton is on the telephone, and then he comes on and he said, "Hey, look, you know, the interview they was gonna have, he's not gonna have that interview anymore and stuff. That is canceled." He said that he talked to somebody with some brains, kind of told him, how he did, Cody and stuff like that, and he listened and everything, and he said to himself, he said that he's a, Cody calls him, Randy calls himself a killer, and then he reminded Cody Rhodes, he said, "Hey, look, you know, um, wrestling has more than one royal family," which is true because we have Bob Orton Jr., we have Bob Orton Sr., and then we have, Randy Orton. So yes, he is telling the truth, because we know the Ortons. If you knew wrestling back in those days and stuff, I grew up with Bob Orton Jr. and stuff as him wrestling and stuff. But anyway, we have Javon Evans, Dragon Lee and Kofi Kingston. They're talking in the back. And Kofi's asking Javon, to join him, since Xavier Woods is hurt and stuff, and that he wanted to, mentor Javon to becoming a better wrestler. Grayson Waller, saying that he doesn't understand why Kofi Kingston, is looking at Javon the way that he is. He doesn't see what does he see in him? And then Kofi tells Grayson Waller that, hey, people were saying the same thing, when Grayson Waller came to them, what do they see in Grayson Waller and stuff? And then Grayson Waller looked at him and he walks off, and then well, he didn't walk off because then Danhausen comes out, and Danhausen started talking and everything, and he tells Kofi Kingston that he's cursed, but before he said he cursed, Kofi Kingston puts Grayson Waller in the way, and then so I guess Grayson Waller is going to be cursed. So we'll see how that goes, next week or however that works out and stuff. But then we have Stephanie Vaquer and Raquel Rodriguez. You know, that was a good match. This match was happening, because Raquel was supposed to do something to hopefully try to hurt, Stephanie Vaquer, to get her warmed up, for Liv and everything. But the match ended up being a pretty good match. I don't like that, the devil's kiss and anything that Stephanie has. I think that's just a retarded, move, but she does it. People, they seem to like it and stuff. So, but anyway, the match went on. Liv tried to interfere, and as she tried to interfere, then Sky came out. For the reason why Sky came out, I have absolutely zero idea why she did that and stuff, because she's not even in the storyline for anything that was going on here. So I don't know. But anyway, Io gets she gets dived on and thrown over the announcer's desk and everything. And then Stephanie grabs Liv and she throws her over the barrier, the barricades. And then she gets in the ring, and then she does some type of roll up, and then goes on Raquel's legs and pins her for the 1, 2, 3, and wins the match. Then we got Lyra, Raquel, and Bayley, and Lyra's telling Bayley that she's going to do everything that she can to make sure that Bayley, makes it to some form of WrestleMania and stuff like that. And then the Kabuki Warriors come out, and Oscar's saying that nobody's ready for Oscar, and that her and Kyrie are going to be going for the tag team titles or whatever the case may be and stuff. And so um, Lyra, I guess, tell Bayley, hey, look, if they're going to go for the tag team titles, why don't we go for the tag team titles? And they say, she said, yeah, so let's go talk to, Adam Pearce. And so they walked off to go talk to Adam Pearce and stuff. So we'll see what happens to that. I think, with the women's tag title for WrestleMania, I think that's going to be I don't know what they're going to do with that and stuff. So, well, stay tuned. Then we got LA Knight, backstage with the Usos and everything, and he's LA Knight is telling Jimmy and Jay, that the division has his name in their mouth, and they have Uso's name in their mouths and everything, and that they, what are they going to do about it and stuff like that. And then Jimmy said, hey, look, we're trying to take care of, some family business and everything as far as CM Punk is concerned and stuff, and then LA Knight is basically trying to figure out whether or not they're on the same page and stuff, and then, Jay tells LA Knight to mind his business and stuff. And then LA Knight said, hey, look, he hoping that everybody's on, the same page, because the fact is, if they're looking to become the old bloodline, then, he has a problem with that. And there's going to be a problem because now they ain't going to be on the same page. And you all know go back a couple of years ago, how with the bloodline, how they did, with LA Knight and stuff. So hopefully it doesn't get that way. Hopefully, I don't know how they're going to do this with the bloodline. Are they going to bring them back and stuff? Right now it's just, Roman and Jimmy and Jay. So if anybody's going to, join them, we just got to wait and see. But anyway, LA Knight and Jimmy, they dapped and everything. And then he wanted to dap Jay, but Jay looked at him. And then LA Knight, he just walked off and said his famous phrase, yo. And then we get the main event. We get Roman Reigns, coming out, you know, um, and the people, chanting his name. And they say, people in the back, you know who he is and know what the people are saying, because he's the beginning, he's the middle, and he's the now and stuff, and who cares, and everybody knows, that he's the number one and that he's the OTC, you know, and then he calls out, he talks about CM Punk, but he uses his name Phil. And he says that, CM Punk is confused and he forgot that, he's in the main event of WrestleMania. And, and that he knows, that this show, as far as Raw is concerned, is his show, but WrestleMania is CM Punk's. I mean, not CM Punk, but Roman Reigns' thing because he's main evented 11 of them, so. And then he calls CM Punk out, and then CM Punk, he comes out and stuff, and he says, to Roman that he knows, he's trying to use his government name, and that, if he's trying to use it, as an insult, he said it doesn't phase him or anything like that. And he's saying that, only his family and friends are the ones that call him Phil and stuff. And and he said that he wouldn't even try to insult Roman Reigns by calling him Tiaki or something like that, and stuff. So I don't know what the kind of name he said. And then he says he wouldn't even call him Joe because, that's Roman's real name is Joe. But anyway, he said he wouldn't call him Joe because that would, insult, Joe, who he loves very much, and which we're talking about Samoa Joe and stuff. So that was cool. They gave a little shout out to Samoa Joe on that one and everything. The Roman says that, CM Punk should call, Samoa Joe, and then Samoa Joe would be the one to remind him that, who is the tribal chief. So, and I thought that was pretty cool. Um, and then CM Punk asked him, is it true that, he sent, the whole Samoa team, after him, to get him? And then Roman Reigns said that, he didn't say that. He didn't say, he didn't say that. He said they gave him permission to do whatever they're gonna do and stuff to CM Punk. You know, um, and he said the only thing that they're gonna do, is give him a high five like everyone else did, in San Antonio when he got there and stuff. So he got a little pop off of that one and stuff. Basically, CM Punk say he ain't afraid of nobody, as far as the bloodline is concerned. I think he better be afraid because there are some crazy ones in there and stuff. I know it and stuff. And he's telling that they told Roman Reigns that he's surprised that Roman hasn't really done anything to him, or hit him or anything like that, and he's going on saying that he's already won WrestleMania because he's already in the head of Roman Reigns, and Roman Reigns says to CM Punk he wouldn't expect him to think that because he would expect him to think that um, as far as that, because that's how Roman, that's how CM Punk thinks, that he's in somebody's mind, but that he's not, and then he says that he has CM Punk, in the main event at WrestleMania and stuff, and he told CM Punk like, look, you're in this WrestleMania and you're at the main event because you've never main evented anything, you know, this year. And he even went on to say that there was a live show overseas in Europe that CM Punk was on the card as a champion, and he didn't even main event that. That's crazy, So, yeah, that brought a little bit of heat. Oh man. And so, they're going back and forth at each other. And then eventually Roman, tells him like, hey, you with the big boys, you got to find out what the big boys do and how the big boys play. And then he told him to go ask his wife how the big boys play. Ooh, that was pretty deep. Wow, that was pretty, that was cutting it deep. And then Roman Reigns, he tries to leave the ring and stuff after saying that to CM Punk, and then CM Punk, kind of blocks him off and everything and stuff. And then CM Punk goes to tell him, hey, look, you know, this is his show, this is his ring, this is his title. And he tells, people when they can come and when they can go. And I'm like, oh man, they're about ready to get down. They're about ready to go at it. But they shot a little bit more, insults at each other and everything. And then eventually, Roman Reigns basically told CM Punk, hey, that he looks bad as far as himself with the title, I guess his matches, how he act and everything like that. And he said that, CM Punk is making everybody look bad, not look good. And he said at the end of everything and at the end of the day, he said CM Punk was old. And when he said that, CM Punk decked Roman Reigns. Roman Reigns went down like a sack of potatoes and stuff. And so the officials come in, they try to break it up. Well, they do break it up because they don't brawl. And Roman gets up, he says, "See, I'm in his head." That CM Punk is talking all that talk, but if you say something to him, he's sensitive and he loses his mind. And then he goes on to say, "Now who's in whose head?" and stuff like that. And then the show goes off without them brawling and stuff. So 4 weeks away. WrestleMania's, coming. It looks like they're trying to get some matches together, like this one with, Brock Lesnar and OBA FEMI. That's going to be a good one. Now, see if they can get more matches like that, built up for WrestleMania. WrestleMania might be, a pretty good show. But they got 4 weeks to do it, and I don't think that's going to happen because right now they're selling the tickets at 31.6% off the regular ticket price. So that means they're not selling any tickets. So hopefully that'll put some, they're going to have some matches. They're going to have some great matches to put butts in seats. But anyway, please don't forget to subscribe, like, share, leave a comment. Let me know how you're feeling and stuff. Just leave a comment and subscribe. Hit that bell and let me know. All right. Thank you for watching. God bless. Deuces. And I'll see you on the next video. Thank you.